next guest speaker is José Luis Rubio. He is going to be addressing mainly the environmental consequences of fracking, and to summarize in few words in just a sentence, and trying to get into the core of the subject, the discussion on the use of fracking and the impacts of its use on hydric water resources, the use of the land, landscape impact, alteration of the water cycle and aquifers, and different pollution impacts, just to, make the point about this third presentation on induced seismicity and the impact on the environment. José Luis Rubio, he's director of the department on CSIC, a department of soil preservation on the center of CIDE, the University of Valencia. He won the prize Jaime I of environmental preservation, has also given advice to many different national and international institutions, the SIGMET, European Parliament, OECD, etc. And he's been the author of many different papers, books, chapters, PhD thesis, and he's been chief researcher in many different. So he's got quite a sound and solid professional career, and he's got over 30 years of experience regarding land use, erosion, preservation of water and soil resources, integrated cartography, etc. So just not to extend ourselves, the most important part is what's said by our guest speakers. So we are thankful for having accepted our invitation. We thank him. Well, thank you, actually. Thank David Dafargan, his efficient team, and all the institutions, all the backing institutions, UNED and J. Sender Foundation. And I really do congratulate you for this wonderful conference, the second conference here. And it's a pleasure for me to be able to share with you this seminar. Is my first time here in Barbastro, and my impression so far has been wonderful. And the subject that Disha will be addressing is going to be focusing mainly on the environmental impacts and the risk for people of fracking. And I'll start my lecture just trying to refresh in your memory some slides that we could see, and they are quite impressive, but they are actually real, and really this may happen and has happened, just to open water tap and to have the grisou, the horrible grisou proportion between 5 and 15%. It's not that it would clear out, it would be exploding. And it's a point of reference. And it sets the path of which are the main environmental implications of fire dam and fracking techniques. But let's go step by step. Actually, energetic resources have been the main driver, the main engine of human culture. And without energy, the whole system collapses. So we need energy. But we need, and we may say that we have a very intense record of mistakes that have led to environmental disaster, material disasters, human disasters, and probably the situation here is to learn from the past, and when facing the future within a context of an energy-eager society, a society that will be needing a lot of energy in the future, we should consider implications not only in terms of purely economic aspects, but also other type of impacts and implications. That's why the sector is fully aware of the need to improve these impacts, and there's many different surveys and reports, the ones I'm mentioning here, I'm showing you here, under the concept of sustainable mining. Mining is considered intrinsically as non-sustainable as an activity, because the matter is to, locate a resource, extract that resource. Sustainability, which is based upon the principle of using things intelligently enough for the future generations to be able to use it again, is absolutely impossible to sustain. So if sustainable mining promotes positive aspects such as a better need to accept or to work on public awareness, or the not in my backyard principle, not at home or not in my municipality, not in my protected environment, but in somebody else's backyard. And other principles also concerning a wider concept of sustainability that would involve a proper relation with other land uses, second presence principles or infrastructures, landscaping, etc., human health and safety, and respect to human rights, environmental rights, and economic rights of the population. As far as the European Union is concerned, this is quite an issue, and an issue that concerns the EU, and it has already established 4 basic pillars in terms of sustainability principles within a current context of serious concern regarding energy and geopolitics. In these 4 aspects having to do with the concern for excessive energetic dependency, as it was already mentioned during the day, in a current moment of transition to new energy sources, everything having to do with emissions and greenhouse effect within the context, the larger context of climate change, within a policy climate within the European Union, looking for sustainability criteria that has been included in the Horizon 2020 principle. These are the main 4 pillars proposed by the European Union, that is raising the levels of environmental protection to include externalities or impacts of fracking in order for the economic evaluation or assessment to improve the real results and to improve final locations chosen, the improvement in security and safety, and the introduction of new technology regarding also communication, not only in terms of techniques as themselves. In the particular case of fracking within the European Union already has a wide array of protection measures in terms of environmental protection, but these protection measures do not encompass the non-conventional fossil fuels, and there's important gaps in the implementation of European rules and regulations in the different countries, the different member countries. And it has already been said in our previous speech that some countries such as France, Bulgaria, Austria, Lithuania, that really show a very strong distrust and where there's a very strong controversy regarding fracking. And other countries such as Poland, United Kingdom, Russia or Hungary are clearly supporting fracking. In the case of Poland, as Juan Pedro already mentioned, with a lot of doubts regarding whether the decision is properly assumed or not. And as far as the United Kingdom is concerned, there's a favorable position, and there's Tyndall report that is against the introduction of the fracking. There's 2 different reports from the European Parliament focusing on environmental and human health impact measures, and these documents include an important amount of information, and they are highly detailed, and all the information included has mainly been extracted from the US experience. And basically, European Parliament, what does propose, it is quite a reasonable and critical position on fracking based upon a set of sound arguments. The conclusions are also very detailed, highly elaborated, and the summary would be that there's no such a thing as a directive in Europe, that the current regulation framework has important gaps. The European Water Directive has to be enlarged in order to have into account underground water impacts, the analysis, the cost-effective analysis of the techniques involved. The Parliament also states the possibility of potentially ban toxical chemical products, or at least to have a follow-up of all the substances used. You know that due to patent reasons or copyright reasons, most companies do not properly indicate the products they are using in their fracking operations. To strengthen capacity, or to do some capacity building for regional authorities to be able to control the whole process, the water flow and emission control. And the European Union has asked to develop a specific directive on this issue. And which is the position of the European Commission? Well, the Commission has absolutely neglected everything mentioned by the Mental European Bureau or the European Parliament, and is transferring responsibilities to the different members. The European Commission has no possibility of interfering, and is not going to promote any type of bonding recommendation, and has only issued a recommendation on a set of basic principles in terms of environmental protection, which is a position of European citizens. Of course, they are increasingly concerned, and there's a very important recheck campaign coming from civil society organizations, and with a lot of reports. And not only regulation is required, but also banning is also claimed. And you can see the map where all the protests have been the most important ones, and a series of papers, including the 2013 from National Geographic. You know, it's quite a conservative, quite moderate magazine, but yet they already decided to, or chose to criticize this technique. So therefore, which would be the main environmental impacts of fracking? And the list is absolutely huge, impressive. And there's a lot of implications, a lot of impacts. We have seen and we have heard about them during the whole morning. But just to summarize, the most important one would be the absolutely out of proportion water consumption it would involve, the emission of polluting materials, impacts on human health, pollution of underground waters due to fracking fluids, the land occupation rate, pollution and deterioration of the land and the soils, the impact on the landscape, the loss of biodiversity and habitat fragmentation, important need of infrastructures that it requires, and the potential seismicity, an increase in seismicity. Mr. Hughes said that there is a very solid correlation with seismicity and the increase in seismicity. So the first impact in our direct environment would be the huge consumption in water resources. For each well, you need between 10,000 and 30,000 cubic meters of water, and this from one single fracking operation. In each well, you can do up to 10 different operations. These operations would involve exponential increase in water consumption, and apart from that, there's what the so-called maintenance water would amount to between 26 to 33 million liters of water, and the lack of efficiency in the reuse of water. And in our direct environment, we do have a deficit in water, so we should capture this water from aquifers or underground layers, and this poses serious problems. And we need to add to that in this fifth report, the most recent report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the forecast for our environment would be a reduction of water resources due to the decrease in precipitations due to the increase in temperatures, which would lead to higher evapotranspiration. So in this situation of low water resources, this situation is going to be aggravated in the future in terms of water resources and pollution. European Parliament identified 260 different chemical products, a list that would be used in fracking operations, out of which 58 would be quite concerning.
Yeah. And on this slide, you can see how alarming they are. Of these 58, 6 of them in these lists of priority substances that require immediate attention, in the opinion of the EU. These are substances, one of which, naphthalene bis, is bioablative, toxic. Other substances are among those on priority action list. 17 are toxic for marine animals. 18 are acute toxins, carcinogenic. 6 also cause cancer, mutagenic. And 5 have effects on the reproduction system. So the list is truly terrible. As for the emission of pollutants and the pollution of the soil and water, in the fracking fluids, there are nitrogen oxide, sulfur oxide, carbon monoxide, all form part of the emissions, and COBs such as benzene, toluene, xylene, and 35 other chemical compounds. So some emissions that are very significant. And another thing that we heard about this morning from David Hughes, this publication from Cornell University, in which Robert Howard in 2012 called fracking something dirtier than coal. And there are a great many findings here that sort of counter the publicity that fracking had attributed to itself was the reduction in greenhouse gases. That is not true. And there are doubts about these so widely publicized advantages, and other studies that state that the shale gas techniques emit 40% more methane than conventional gas extraction operations. Another impact, the occupation of the territory, which is not like in those visuals we had seen of flat areas, but areas with topography such as that of Spain, which are very complicated, in which the impact can be tremendous and long-lasting. And this is so because the platforms required some 10,000 cubic meters with a density of 6 wells per square kilometer, and a number of auxiliary installations, tanks, ponds, processing stations, warehouses, and a network of roadways that are built on our land with all of the implications that that has. And as Shell just said, the great number of trucks carrying water, taking materials to all of these installations around our topography, and so that is a serious mortgage of our territory. And as for repercussions on the landscape, there is an aesthetic component which is not insignificant, and then this network of roadways also makes for major earth movements and a destabilization of slopes that could increase erosion processes, alteration of the surface hydrological cycle with the erosion of sediments, alteration of riverbeds, and so forth, of slopes, that is. And as for animal life, fracturing habitats, altering biological connectivity of plants and animals, as well as the impact in the territory, which leads to modifications in populations, flora, fauna, in the soil, and water. All of it leading to a loss of biodiversity. And speaking of biodiversity, I'm focusing here not on all of the authorizations and applications that Marcos mentioned in the Basque and Cantabrian region. I'm referring to Aragon, including Maestrazgo and part of Valencia. And in this area, we enjoy one of the truly privileged areas in terms of biodiversity. Our natural heritage is an asset that should be used in economic terms and business terms. So the places where we have a territory of enormous biodiversity, thanks to this complex topography and with a very demanding climate that has led to fascinating biological adaptations of plants and animals to survive in these tough conditions over time, this enormous biodiversity heritage, which is translated, obviously I won't go into detail here because it might take all night, but it is a very significant natural heritage that make this a privileged, unique, and surprising region as far as biodiversity is concerned. This is the place where all these things are planned and proposed with this technique of doubtful consequences. The biophysical setting for fracking would be rich, complex, and varied, but also fragile and also vulnerable, and especially because of our climatological conditions and the physics of it, the geomorphological composition of our territory. We have a semi-arid climate with average rainfall of 500 to 600 millimeters, with great annual and interannual variability, a accentuated hydric deficit, high evapotranspiration, very abrupt topography, not much vegetation cover. Our climate leads to extreme episodes such as droughts, heat waves, torrential rain, and our soil that the vegetable or plant cover is based on is not very deep. They tend to be sloped and vulnerable to erosion. This edaphic component that is the very cornerstone of our territory and the use of our territory leads it to have very significant limitations. Here we see some taxonomic groups of soils, especially in forested areas, where we see just a few centimeters of topsoil in our lithosols and phytozyms. These soils, when there's a forest fire, for example, or torrential rain, the topsoil can literally be washed away. And when this is lost, the rocky outcroppings impede biological functions. There's the regulation of the hydric cycle, agricultural production, forest production, and leads to an extreme degradation of the territory. Other soils, the lubisols or cambisols, are further developed, and the soils used in the altiplane areas or the marginal forest areas and silvicultural areas also face limitations, as they have little organic material, usually high content of calcium carbonate. And in terms of texture, leads them to have repercussions in their stability and their fertility. And going back to the 8th report by the IPPC, in that report, they stated, especially as regarded 2/3 of the Iberian Peninsula, as an area that would receive a high impact if current climate change trends continued, and was also identified as one of the most vulnerable areas worldwide. And the IPPC reports, as you know, these are thousands and thousands of pages, and I will just summarize one small part of it. It says that the risk of desertification is going to be higher. Our future will be more arid, drier, and that will lead to more hydric deficit and more instability in the territory. This is a territory in which fracking is proposed, for example. It does not seem the most appropriate way out. And this is the risk of desertification map, and these areas that I refer to are within these levels of high, moderate, or medium risk of desertification. So the answer is that we must be careful in this territory as to how we use the territory in the physical context, in the climatic context. But if we're in a period of energetic transformation, it is obvious that we have to be cautious. Our approach with these conditions that we have, with their pros and cons, we must ask ourselves, what is the future that we want for our territory? What would be the best option? And to now wrap up, just a few considerations of precaution along the lines of thinking of these techniques as having extremely high investment costs. I was very impressed with the slides this morning with those millions or thousands of wells in the U.S., each of them with these major investments behind them. And as Marcos has already said, the studies that apply for these interventions in our territory are not very rigorous, and there is a great deal of uncertainty as regards the supposed beds or fields, as we've already heard, and there are no environmental protection plans or waste management plans. It is a extraction technique that has not been justified, that seriously undermines the territory, and a great inappropriateness as regards water and the configuration of aquifers that José Luis Simón will speak to in greater detail. And also the transition, we must be very cautious with the transition periods, and there is a doubtful compatibility with regards to a sustainable use of our territory. So, in conclusion, let me say that this technique offers very serious objections on an environmental and social levels. As I put this presentation together, I reached these conclusions. But after hearing everyone speaking so far today, I think that I have offered you a very moderate viewpoint, as I'm even more convinced that this is definitely not the most appropriate technique, at least not for the territory at hand. Furthermore, it is a depleted energetic model. It is a model that has an expiry date already. It is not recommendable or applicable in our conditions. And number 3, it has so many uncertainties and insecurity of all types, of the environmental, social, and economic types, that it just doesn't make sense. My final conclusion would be the following. We must truly vie for a serious thought process around the future that we want for our territory, and our orientation must be clearly toward environmentally acceptable and socially sustainable policies at all times. Thank you.